Last week, Julia Gillard finally announced the details of the carbon tax. She's got the support of the 3 independents and the Greens. Barring the unforeseen, a carbon tax of $23 a tonne.
Australians are used to the extreme bias of reporting from the ABC. The lies and disinformation coming from this government-funded media outlet would make George Orwell roll in his grave. Broadcast across Radio National on July 17, 2011, Wendy Carlisle hosts a background briefing dedicated to smearing Lord Monckton. So desperate to avoid the actual arguments and information contained in Lord Monckton's presentation, Wendy spends the majority of the report resorting to character attacks and engaging in frivolous conspiracy theories regarding who funded the tour. Never mind that Al Gore charges $300,000 per speaking engagement and stands to make billions of dollars from his interest in the Chicago Climate Exchange. Don't worry about that. Don't worry about that at all. In the only part of this propagandized report where the science is actually addressed, Wendy has to resort to lying and misrepresenting the arguments made by Lord Monckton. Let's hear what Wendy had to say.
Describing himself as a comic and an entertainer, Lord Monckton's enormous PowerPoint of cartoons and graphs and polar bears is a giant satire on Al Gore's inconvenient truth.
Well, here are the polar bears we mentioned earlier, and Gore, for once, actually cites a scientific paper. He cites it wrong, of course, but he does cite it. And what he says is, a scientific study shows for the first time they're finding polar bears that have drowned swimming long distances to find the ass. Swimming long distances to find the ass. And so here is the actual map from the paper. 4 dead polar bears. Golly gosh, shiver shiver. Hold the front page. And what have we got, in fact? 4 dead polar bears. Did any of these polar bears, according to the paper he was quoting, die or because they were trying to find the ice, or I should say find the ass? No. They died because there was a big storm with high winds and high waves and they got swamped. Or as we scientists call it, shit happens. So there's no basis at any point for Al Gore's story. It was complete fiction from start to finish.
The scientific paper Lord Monckton cites does not say that the polar bears drowned because of a big storm. The paper suggests that the polar bears most likely drowned because there was less sea ice for them to seek refuge on because of climate change, and that the drowned polar bears could be statistically significant. The paper goes on to say,
"We further suggest that drowning-related deaths of polar bears may increase in the future if the observed trend of regression of pack ice and/or longer open water periods continues."
Lord Monckton is not one to let the facts stand in the way of a show.
Wendy is lying to the Australian people and being paid with your taxes to do so. Let's check her facts. Did the actual paper actually state what Wendy claims? No, it does not. The paper in question, Monnett, C. and J.S. Gleason, 2006. Observations of mortality associated with extended open water swimming by polar bears in the Alaskan Beaufort Sea. The paper states in its discussion, our observations suggest that polar bears swimming in open waters near Kaktovik drowned during a period of high winds and correspondingly rough sea conditions between 10 and the 13th of September 2004. No other deleterious environmental conditions were present that might have led to the deaths of those polar bears. And we believe that the increased risk of swimming in open water is not likely to result simply from long-distance swimming, as polar bears are considered strong swimmers. The authors do proceed to speculate that less ice and harsher wind conditions expected in the future from climate change may cause more drowning-related deaths. But, Ms. Carlisle, it is the study's data that is the science, not the author's speculations about what might happen if some future climate trends continue. Wendy is not the first person to promote this lie about dying polar bears. In fact, this myth has been popularized and promoted by many proponents of climate change. Here is a television advertisement featuring polar bears dying. On a side note, who funds these expensive television advertisements? But Wendy's lying did not stop here. Let's hear Wendy continue her state-sanctioned propaganda.
Lord Monckton is not one to let the facts stand in the way of a show.
And here's a further evidence of this, because in those parts of the Arctic where the temperature on the left had got warmer, in this case red means getting warmer, which is a fairly normal use of it, then on the right the polar bear populations increased. Where it got cooler in blue, they decreased. So this appears to suggest that the polar bears quite like warmer weather. Why would that be? Because they evolved from black bears who came from the land, and they are warm-blooded creatures, just like us. If the Arctic gets warmer, they're just going to love it. They're going to have a ball.
The evidence that Lord Monckton cites for polar bears having a ball in warmer weather was a report produced by Greenpeace in 2002. Trouble is, the report doesn't say what Lord Monckton says it says. It's not temperature per se that's the primary concern for polar bears, but sea ice loss. Here's a reading from that report.
Polar bears in Hudson Bay are being impacted by climate change. As sea ice is being reduced in the area, the polar bear's basis for survival is being threatened.
And the show continued like this for another 50 minutes, with Lord Monckton repeatedly misconstruing the scientific evidence.
More lies and distortions. Thank you, Wendy. Point 1. Lord Monckton provides the reference to the report, so he is not trying to hide anything. Point 2. It was not a Greenpeace report, but a report from the Worldwide Fund for Nature. I'm willing to concede that this was probably not a deliberate lie, but just gross incompetence on Wendy's behalf. Point 3. Wendy says a report doesn't say what Lord Monckton says it does. Well, yes, it does. The data Lord Monckton refers to is in the report. Actually, what Lord Monckton points out is that the temperature data in the report shows higher populations of polar bears in warmer regions. He does not suggest the report states that polar bears love it. That is his own conclusion, and the data in the report clearly supports that. Point 4. As for the report going on to state that the polar bears are impacted by a reduction in sea ice. Yes, the report does say that. However, Wendy forgets to mention the part of the presentation she saw, where Lord Monckton cites a graph from Mellin and others, that shows there has been no statistically significant change in the sea ice in the Arctic during the last 30 years, including the period of the polar bear report. This suggests the finding of the Worldwide Fund for Nature report's conclusions, and Al Gore's assertions, that the polar bears are threatened by a lack of ice, are complete garbage. Lord Monckton did not misconstrue, twist, or lie in this matter. He took data from a report to make an independent observation, and referenced his sources. This is normal and perfectly acceptable academic practice. The fact the report draws conclusions that are not in line with Lord Monckton is irrelevant. What is important is the data in the report. What Wendy is counting on is that you will believe her, and not bother to actually view Lord Monckton's presentation. What else does Wendy and the Ministry of Propaganda have for us?
And the show continued like this for another 50 minutes, with Lord Monckton repeatedly misconstruing the scientific evidence.
Because Al Gore says in his movie that because of the melting of two ice sheets, Greenland and the West Antarctic, sea level is going to rise by 20 feet imminently. But in fact, the IPCC says that because of those two ice sheets, the amount of contribution to sea level rise will be over the whole of the next 100 years. 6 centimetres, which is 2.5 inches, not 610 centimetres, which is 20 feet. So there is a 100-fold exaggeration by Al Gore. I'm going to do this big, baby.
On this occasion, the exaggerations cut both ways. Yes, Al Gore did overstate his case, but Lord Monckton's assertion that the UN's climate change panel says seas will only rise by 6 centimetres this century is pure fiction. According to Chapter 5 of its report on sea levels, the sea is expected to rise between 20 and 50 centimetres this century.
Let's cut through the lies and deception. Al Gore alleged a sea level rise of 7 meters due just to the melting of Greenland in the West Antarctic sheet. Lord Monckton's retort is that from IPCC data, the expected contribution of sea level rise from melting of the Greenland and West Antarctic sheet alone works out to be only 6 centimeters. Therefore Al Gore made a 100-fold exaggeration. But Ms. Carlisle claims the IPCC AR4 report states a much higher sea level rise of 20 to 50 centimeters. Yes, it does, but this figure includes all causes of sea level rise, namely thermal expansion, 17 to 28 centimeters, the melting of glaciers and ice caps, 10 to 12 centimeters, and this is in addition to the loss of ice from the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets. In summary, Lord Monckton was disputing Al Gore's stated amount of sea level rise from the melting of the Greenland and West Antarctic ice sheets alone. The 6 centimeters that Lord Monckton refers to is the contribution to sea level rise expected from these two sources, as per the IPCC's AR4 report. Wendy on the other hand is quoting the report's figure for the total sea level rise, encompassing all sources. Yet again Wendy has been caught out trying to manipulate your views and opinions by feeding you lies and disinformation. The man-made climate change and carbon tax proponents want us to drastically change our way of life. They want you to pay more and to have less. With the biggest tax increase in Australian history, they then want to privatize the carbon tax and hand it over to an international private banking cartel, as the ETS in 2015. They want to regulate every aspect of your life with endless red tape, and they are prepared to lie to get it. It is important that the real debate be given a chance. The ABC is different to any other media outlet operating in Australia, and not just because your taxes fund this propaganda platform. Commercial media outlets must comply with a government code of practice or face fines, or even lose their broadcasting licenses. The ABC, however, gets to regulate itself. It does not have to answer to an independent body. To date, the ABC has taken no steps to correct the record. To date, the ABC has taken no steps to reprimand the reporter Wendy Carlisle, and our government has taken no steps to reprimand the ABC. The ABC is a network of liars, and the Australian government, by its deafening inaction, is complicit with the ABC. A government that lies to its people is no longer the lawful government of the people. Where we go from here is up to you. A government that lies to its people is no longer the lawful government of the people. Where we go from here is up to you. A government that lies to its people is no longer the lawful government of the people. Where we go